Thank you for joining Once Changing the World, India's first Future Tech meets Sustainability podcast. And today, I'm delighted now to have with me Mr. Nick Halper, who's a seasoned professional with extensive experiences in operational leadership and product management in the space of neurotechnology. He currently serves as the Chief Operating Officer at Motif Neurotech. Nick has been part of groundbreaking neurotech companies such as Blackrock Neurotech, which has been providing hope for people with paralysis and other neurological disorders. He was the co-founder and COO at Braingrade, developing implantable neuromodulation device for dementia. Nick also co-hosts the Neurratives Podcast, serves as an advisor, and has contributed significantly to Neuromatch's mission of expanding accessibility in neurotech and computational sciences. So Nick, really appreciate you taking time and being part of the podcast. This is something which I kind of pulled off the net. It will be great if you could start with the background, your past companies, and what kind of nudged you to choose neurotech as a career.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I think the reason I actually came into neurotechnology as a career is because of my mom. She is an amputee. Or similar to an amputee. She's missing a limb. And when I was younger and first kind of learning about how the world worked, my father was also he worked on vending machines. And so we had these little servo motors and electrical parts kind of lying around the house all the time. And I tinkered with them as a kid. And when I first learned that the nervous system communicates through electrical signals, I was like, oh, wow. It's so simple. We can just hook up these motors to the body and we'll be able to make robotic limbs. And this way my mom can have a much better functioning leg. And of course, I got some feedback from my parents. It's not quite that easy. The world is a little bit more complicated. But I was always sort of interested in that concept. And so growing up and going through school, this drove an interest in the nervous system and neuroscience and how the brain works. And I ended up pursuing that as a career professionally.
Cool. How cool is this? But yeah, like you said, I mean, the brain, it's not so simple. I mean, it's extremely complicated. 80 billion neurons, 100 trillion synapses, and the way they fire and wire, which brings around, I mean, all of five senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, taste. And yes, I mean, the electric signal is responsible for nervous systems. It will be great if you could kind of, start with kind of explaining what is neurotech, what is brain-computer interfaces, both invasive and non-invasive, and also neuromodulation devices. How will this growth of neurotech impact our world?
Yeah. I very much believe that neurotechnology is going to be a major future technology. I think at some point in the past, it was wild to think about everybody owning a computer and working from a computer every day. I think that we're kind of at the same place in neurotechnology. There will be a place in the future where everybody somehow interfaces with their nervous system. It's a common class of devices that we use to do all sorts of things. But to explain what those devices are, I'm going to step back a little bit. Neurotechnology broadly is the description of a field of building devices, usually electrical devices that can do some sort of computing or something like that interface with the nervous system. So just as you mentioned, our nervous system controls every part effectively of who we are. It affects our emotions. It affects how we feel and think, anxieties, mental health. It affects how we move and speak and see. And so when we think about interfacing with that system, there's all sorts of things we can modulate or impact. So when I tell you, for example, that I could make a neurotechnology device that lets blind people see again, that one might feel a little bit more obvious. I can stimulate signals into your visual cortex or other part of your brain for vision, and I can start recreating video or movement or images on that visual cortex. That one sounds a little bit more straightforward. But because your nervous system modulates so many things in your body, it can do things like that you might regard as more medicinal or something related to pharmaceuticals. So, for example, there are neurotech devices, neurostimulators for arthritis, for diabetes, for things to help with your heart rhythm and rate. And so there's all sorts of ways that you can control and modulate the body by interfacing with the nervous system. There's a lot of different definitions thrown around in the neurotechnology field, things like brain-computer interfacing or neuromodulation. Ultimately, what we're describing are devices that interface and interact with the body. So they all kind of fit broadly in that neurotech definition. A neuromodulation device is typically one that's just stimulating into the body. It's modulating or controlling a system. Whereas we think about a brain-computer interface as something that's more reciprocal. It's somehow responding to the body, it's computing, and it's doing something else. And I think in brain-computer interfaces, there's really kind of two big classes. You have these kind of therapeutic BCIs, ones that are meant to provide some sort of stimulation and care and response to a system. And then you have ones that are mostly meant to get signals out of the body. So for example, something that records signals to control an external effector. So controlling a robotic arm or controlling a computer interface. So I think those are some of the big categories that exist. I think one more that you defined is this idea of invasive versus non-invasive. It's a term that you hear used often, but it means not much. A lot of companies try to use it because it's a nice marketing term to say your device is non-invasive, or it doesn't. It sounds less scary, but it's really more of a spectrum. And that spectrum is sort of ill-defined because it's going to depend on what that person regards as invasive into their lives. So for example, you can have a device that doesn't penetrate your body in any way. It doesn't go inside of it or touch your nerves directly, but it could be very invasive into your lifestyle and way of living. So for example, you might have seen these EEG caps or nets that you can wear on your head that read your brain signals through your scalp. They're very uncomfortable. They're very cumbersome to wear. I would regard them as very invasive. At the same time, you can get an implant that is inside of your body. It's very invasive in that it's inside of you, but it's invisible. You don't notice it any day, and it just integrates with your life. And so it's hard to classify invasive and exactly what that means.
Yeah, I'm sure there's different definitions of it, but I mean, just to kind of simplify it, it's something which doesn't go inside your brain, because I think that's a part of the brain, body, which is completely complex. So having something implanted is something which I don't think the world is still ready. I'm sure, because as humans we've always augmented ourselves. So I'm sure when this technology kind of advances, I'm sure we will kind of leverage those implantable, possibly, which is kind of surgically inserted in your brain. We will accept that. But today, like you mentioned, we have these EEG devices. This kernel has got these BCIs, and I hope that we get into a world, because I'm somebody who's followed sci-fi, series and movies a lot. In Black Mirror, you see these non-invasive devices which you kind of stick on. I'm sure these are extremely futuristic, and I'm sure that there is no kind of timeline for that. But technology has always been accelerating, beyond even what or human comprehension, and I'm sure there will be some kind of a tool someday where we will be able to kind of cognitively, structurally and functionally maybe able to map a human brain through maybe just like a wearable device like this, maybe like a glasses, because I guess with virtual reality we kind of doing a lot of that, because the Valve is working on a EEG based headset, and there's many other companies who are kind of doing that. So the hope is that someday we actually kind of move towards that non-invasive. Though I think today I think we need to kind of read the neural firings. You need these invasive kind of devices. You being part of Blackrock Neurotech, and they were the leaders in the space. Trying to sort out disabilities and paralysis, and also depression and anxiety and so on and so forth. Will be great if you could talk about your journey with Blackrock Neurotech, and what were you guys pioneering. If you guys could share with the audience, that'll be really nice.
So Blackrock was actually my first job in the neurotech field. I was very fortunate to be close to the team already geographically. They were based here in Utah, and this is where I grew up as well. But they actually kind of spun out of the university, or were closely integrated with the university, and that was sort of my path to them. But yeah, my work at Blackrock, when I started there, Blackrock was completely focused on motor prosthetics. And Blackrock has a pretty interesting approach to how they are commercializing and growing the neurotech field. It's different than a lot of other BCI companies you might see, because Blackrock is really involved in the research side of the business. They started out by and continue to make tools for electrophysiology research. Electrophysiology just being the study of the nervous system and effectively how it works by studying it on an electrical basis. And so what they build are these research tools for scientists to use in their labs, and they use these for all sorts of purposes. They can use them for animal research, but one of the things that distinguished Blackrock from other electrophysiology research tool companies was that they were specialized in helping people do human research, clinical research. And so they were really involved with and pioneered and led some of the first trials in brain-computer interfacing, motor prosthetics, etc. And so Blackrock's patients, or the patients of their customers, I should say, are some of the first people really to be implanted with these neural interfaces, which is why Blackrock, I think, helped peg the term, or as supporting this group as BCI pioneers, who've really taken some bold steps to be the first people to explore this technology in their lives. So I think Blackrock's approach is innovative and useful in terms of being able to be involved in that early research space, see all of the work as it's being done in the labs, and kind of helping people identify places to bring that technology into humans. And that was an interesting pipeline to help cultivate at Blackrock.
So neurological disorders, I mean, it's a huge problem. Dementia is a very, very big problem. You are the co-founder at Braingrade, and you are developing this implantable neuromodulation device. Can you explain the approach and this implantable device, and where does it stand at this point in time now, and what was its, when you tested it out, what was the results of it?
Yeah. So I think there's a fun little neuroscience background lesson, I think, when talking about something like dementia versus what Blackrock worked on. So Blackrock worked, I mentioned, on motor prosthetics neurotechnology. These affect how your limbs move. Usually the way that they do this is they record neural signals from your motor cortex, a strip on the kind of center of your head, kind of from your ear to the top of your head, the way that space is mapped is actually, it's like kind of topologically or physically mapped to the way your body is organized. So if you're controlling the muscle in one finger, then the nerves right next to that probably control the muscles on the finger next to it. And this means that when you're putting electrodes into that space, you're kind of just trying to map them over that region, and the denser the number of electrodes, the more of them there are, the kind of better control you could have of a robotic limb, or more realistic or representative control. And this is the same way that your vision works as well in the brain. Other concepts in the brain are a bit more complex. The brain is very much a system, right? There's all these pieces and parts communicating with each other, and there's patterns that communicate at long distances in the brain. So you see these effects, these brain waves of these patterns that are coordinating different regions of the brain at long distances. And when we start thinking about something like dementia or Alzheimer's, that's where those long-range communications really start to come into play. And a lot of people call this systems neuroscience. The whole brain is a system, so it's kind of a funny term. But what it really means is this study or concept of thinking about the brain as a complex interacting system, and how you might be able to regulate the states of that system. And so when we talk about memory, we think a lot about memory states and how different parts of the brain coordinate together. And so one of the innovations we were pushing on at Braingrade was how to better do systems neuroscience or circuit neuroscience to be able to understand brain states at far separate regions in the brain and coordinate those to work together better. And this was a much more complex problem, I would say, than some of the work we were doing in motor prosthetics. The research on it is a little bit earlier stage. It's a bit harder to figure out, and building the neural interfaces for it is very difficult because instead of trying to get a bunch of electrodes into one little area, you're really trying to get high density electrodes at many different parts in the brain. And so the interface we were building at Braingrade was specialized to do just that, to record from several regions of the brain so that we could stimulate and coordinate that neural activity across the circuit to help people preserve memory and slow down the effects of Alzheimer's disease.
Nick, how much do we actually know of a human brain? Because it's terribly complex. And I think some of the leading institutes, researchers, scientists, tech companies such as yourself are trying to kind of work and understand building these neurotech, trying to understand the brain. But it still is kind of like a black box. We don't completely understand it. How much do we understand it right now, currently? And what do you think, what breakthroughs are needed for us to maybe understand the brain structurally and functionally?
Yeah, I think we understand relatively little about the brain. It's a very complex system. We're in the phase of this types of science, for the most part, where we are poking it and seeing what happens, basically. So a very common way to do neuroscience today still is to basically put electrodes into the brain and then have that patient do something and look to see what sorts of responses or correlations you get to better understand what that brain region is responsible for or what it does. Now, we've done a lot of that, so we're beginning to understand the sort of functional mapping and organization of the brain. And so we're a little bit more informed as we go in to record new experiments or try new things. And we're kind of in this era where we're starting to modulate. We're stimulating and seeing what happens. We're trying to control or change those signals and seeing what happens in the body or in our experience of the world. And so all of this is to say that we're in this very experimental phase. We don't have this such a solid understanding that we can build a really good hypothesis around what's going to happen if we stimulate one area or change one other thing. We kind of just have to experiment and see. For the most part. Now, one of the challenges with the brain, to your point on it being complex, is that there's a lot of different people understanding it at very different levels. So mostly what I just described is focused on my area, electrophysiology and functional mapping. But there's all sorts of people who are understanding things at the individual cellular level and how cells communicate and how they work together, and people understanding it at a more macro level and looking at cell types and how they're differentiated in different parts of the brain. This is all to say, to answer your question very shortly, we don't understand very much. And I think what we need to understand it more is more data, and especially more data on brains that we really care about and are interested in, human brains. And so you talked earlier about the hopeful future where a pair of glasses can read your brain state and be the thing that your neural interface. I think that is possible. I think to get to that point, we have to be able to understand the brain very deeply through a lot of more invasive data gathering. And from that, we can build models that will make it easier to affect the brain from the outside or with more minimal controls.
Right. So when you say data gathering, is only invasive data the best approach to understand our brain? I mean, are there there's a human connectome project, there's the Blue Brain project who's trying to build in silico brain. I mean, are there other approaches where you think maybe it could accelerate or to help us better understand the brain?
Yeah. So I'll admit up front in this question, I'm a little bit biased because of the area that I work in. But I also work in this area because I think it's the area most likely to result in understandings that are going to be useful to us. A lot of these imaging technologies, Connectome Project, for example, are, I think, very powerful. They help us understand how the brain is organized and how it connects. They could help us build interesting models of the brain, I think, that we could use computationally. But one of the things that we really try to understand in the brain, which is very complex, is the kind of like functional dynamics of it. When a cell fires, how long does it take for it to fire again? What other cells does it affect? How quickly can that happen? What factors control it? And there's a whole lot of wetware or interesting kind of chemical dynamics, I guess, at the synapse that make this hard to understand from just taking imaging or kind of slow responses of the brain and its structure. And so you need this sort of dynamic information gathering to see how cells work together in close proximity and what factors kind of affect and control those. And electrophysiology right now is one of our best tools to do that. I think there are very interesting new technologies that are helping us understand those dynamics using other modalities. So, for example, ultrasound is a way to kind of measure and look at activity through ultrasonic waves. There are images there's things that are using light. So, for example, FNIRS and other things that give us some insight into dynamics. But as it stands today, electrophysiology, electrode and electrical impulse signal gathering are our best tools for understanding the brain at single cell resolution.
So Nick, you're part of Motif Neurotech, and you guys have built something called as DOT, digitally programmable over brain therapeutic. Can you talk about that, and how does it help for treatment resistant depression?
Yeah. So I mentioned through my time at Braingrade that I became very interested in, and I felt like a very important thing to work on in the field was this idea of circuitopathies or systems neuroscience affecting multiple nodes in the brain to understand and control the state of the brain. And I think this is very useful because it affects disorders like Alzheimer's disease, but it actually is also how our brain tends to orient and organize itself for a lot of higher level thinking and cognition. So, for example, the motor interfaces we've talked about so far, vision prosthetics and motor prosthetics, very much control how the effect, the input and output of the world, the control of muscles or the input of information. Whereas if you can understand brain states or do things that affect brain states on a wider kind of network scale, you can affect things like your experience of the world, how you think about the world. This can affect disorders such as depression, PTSD, etc. And so one of what Motif is doing is building a device to work on treatment-resistant depression. And one of the ways in which you can do that is affecting one of these nodes of this network, this dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, a spot kind of on the frontal quarter of your brain, just above your kind of like eye and your ear, if you traced them up to the top of your head. And what we're doing is stimulating this node to help induce plasticity that can help ameliorate the effects of treatment-resistant depression, or provide a treatment to people who aren't getting satisfactory treatment in other ways.
Right. And can you share update on this DOT device? I mean, clinical trials and what's been the results?
Yeah. So one of the approaches that I think Motif is taking that is really smart is when you look at the neurotechnology field, you're seeing this a little bit of a bifurcation where you're having people who are going even more invasive, if we talk about that scale again, and they're putting in more electrodes into deeper sites. The surgeries are getting more complex and longer in hopes to get a kind of bigger and better effect size. Motif is going to something that we believe is a lot more scalable. And so the DOT technology, digital overbrain therapeutic, that you mentioned, is something that actually doesn't enter the brain at all. We replace a small part of the skull with this DOT. And this thing can stimulate across that interface into the brain. So it never actually enters the brain or penetrates it, or there's no damage or surgery. It's not really brain surgery. It's a little bit of skull surgery, which makes it not so different from a bone screw that you might get for a broken arm or something like that. But it can affect your brain, and we've found the right node so that we can affect that broader system of emotion. So the DOT is a very safe technology from this perspective. It's going to be very biocompatible. We've already put it into humans before, and we're gearing up for larger scale clinical trials in the next year to explore the therapeutic impact in more detail.
Right. So this DOT device that you're talking about, is this going to go beyond treatment-resistant depression, or is it just for treatment-resistant depression?
I think this specific device is for treatment-resistant depression. That said, this technology, this idea of being able to stimulate this extracortical stimulation technology, where you're not in the brain, but you're stimulating across that interface from a device implanted into the skull, that will be able to be used for all sorts of disorders. One of the nice things about how the brain is organized is this cortical surface effectively reaches down to deeper structures through these columns. And this means that if you can find the right nodes on the cortical surface, the outside of your brain, you can ultimately affect many parts on the more internal structures of the brain. Or you can control the brain state such that you can modulate a lot of different disorders. And so through the right network pattern of stimulation of dots, getting multiple of these devices at the right nodes, at the right places for different disorders, you'll be able to affect a lot of disorders that are related to not just cognition, even though that's sort of Motif's focus, is devices that are in the mental health and cognition sphere, but things like motor control as well.
Right. Can you share update on the status of your FDA approval process for the long-term clinical trials in humans? And what challenges do you anticipate in this phase?
We are entering our first multi-patient trial. Usually companies go through at least 2 trials on their way to an FDA pre-market approval. And so we have at least this trial and another trial in front of us. As far as challenges we anticipate in this phase, it's not many in some ways. I'm very confident in the DOT technology to be effective here. One of the advantages that we have is we get to follow a little bit in the footsteps of TMS, or transcranial magnetic stimulation. TMS is already used for treatment-resistant depression, and it stimulates at this same site. The innovation that we have here is that we're making this treatment much more accessible to patients who may not be able to tolerate TMS therapy well. TMS therapy is really burdensome. To get a course of TMS treatment, you have to go to the clinic many days in a row, 5, 10, sometimes more, depending on the treatment paradigm. And you have to show up at this clinic and be there for multiple hours. For people who work at a job, that can be difficult. For people who live in rural areas, it can be impossible. And these treatment centers aren't available everywhere, and they're limited in how many patients they can process at a given time. So for any given psychiatrist or treatment clinic, you're limited by how many people can sit in the chair per day. And since they each take multiple hours, the clinic can only manage so many people. The relapse time for TMS is on average 11 months. And so it makes it a difficult therapy to deliver to enough people at scale. And that's why Motif has been focused on scale, making an easy to implant device that can be implanted by many different people and be easily tolerated by many. It'll make this types of therapy, this TMS at home, more effective. So we're not very nervous about the potential clinical benefit because we know we're stimulating the right area. And we're not very nervous about the technology because we've already built it. It's effectively working. And so I think it's really about just showing the proof, showing the world that it works. And we're going to do that through clinical trials.
Right. Besides treatment-resistant depression, what are the other neurological disorders that Motif is going after?
So we're really focused on treatment-resistant depression right now. This is a little bit due to, I think, my role at the company. I think it's very important for companies to focus and make sure they're kind of driving all resources towards creating a big effect in that market that they're targeting. It is very tempting for us to move into and explore modalities like bipolar disorder, since that's sort of closely related to how treatment-resistant depression operates. And so it's possible that something like that is on the near-term horizon for us, but we're really focused on treatment-resistant depression now. So as we're developing this technology, we're also exploring other tools around treatment-resistant depression, things like faster diagnostics, or ways to identify or classify treatment-resistant depression patients to see if they're going to be good responders to this therapy, TMS, or other therapies in the space. So we're really just hoping to find pathways for treatment for these patients.
Right. You've collaborated with Rice University. It will be great if you could talk about that. And recently, you also won the UK government grant to Advance BCI. It would be great if you could also talk about that.
Yeah. So Rice is in some ways our parent or something like that. So our founder, Jacob Robinson, was or is, I should say, a professor at Rice University. This technology was developed in his lab. Something we haven't talked about yet is what actually powers the DOT device. This is a technology called magnetoelectrics. It's basically a technology that makes it very efficient to transfer power wirelessly at small sizes and into deeper depths in the body than traditional and inductive coils that are currently used in other medical devices today. And so this is what allows us to make the DOT very small and can continue to make it smaller using this technology. And so Jacob runs an interesting lab. He's a physicist, but studies the brain. And so there's a lot of different experiments in his lab that range from sort of pure material science and experiments that sort of explore new ways of wireless power transfer, like magnetoelectrics. And then he's able to kind of look at translation of those by applying them to neuroscience research that he's interested in. And so he runs a relatively large and relatively diverse lab that does that. And that's where this technology came from. And so in a lot of ways, we're a Rice spinout. We've been working closely with Rice. It's been awesome to have them help guide us through giving us space to work and facilities to operate in. But we're sort of out on our own now and operating in our own site with our own manufacturing area and everything else.
Right. Nick, as a COO, what's been the core challenges of running a deep tech, neurotech startup? Is it the funding or is it the human perception? Because I guess we humans are still, we don't open up things for things we truly, we don't understand, so what's been like the main challenges?
Yeah. As COO, my side is focused. I basically do everything in the company that's not engineering. So I focus on making sure that we're working closely with the FDA. I have an amazing quality manager who helps make sure that we're producing devices of high quality and that we have a good quality management system. And I'm involved in finance management and things like that. And so it's hard to say any one area is more difficult than the others or more challenging, but certainly the thing I think we think a lot about pre-commercialization is that regulatory and clinical pathway. And so I wouldn't necessarily label them as being the most difficult currently, but it's certainly the thing we think about the most. And we talk frequently with the FDA. We're thinking a lot about making sure that we're working closely with them to bring a technology to market that's going to be safe and acceptable and that we're proving its efficacy correctly. And so a lot of, I think, our thoughts are going into making sure that we're really kind of proving the safety and effectiveness of the technology in the right way so that it can make it to market most quickly.
Elon wants to implant 1 million chips. Though it seems a little futuristic, what are your thoughts on these implantable devices? When do you think this is going to be accepted? And what's the future plan for your DOT for this treatment-resistant depression?
Yeah, I don't think Elon's vision is so crazy in that way. I think there's very good precedent for showing that implantable devices are really well accepted. The pacemaker was a very scary device when it was first released. And there was all sorts of concerns people had around its use. You couldn't use it next to microwaves. And if you walked through an airport scanner, who knows what was going to happen. And these days, a pacemaker is considered one of the safest devices you can get. It's not scary at all. Tons of people have them. They're used as a life-supporting device, even though they're class 3 and they directly interface with your heart. If they fail, you die. But tons of people get them. If you consider these devices more elective, which currently brain-computer interfaces are not, for the most part. I mean, you're going in because you have a specific disorder. You're not getting it just because it sounds fun yet. But even something like breast implants, these are a class 3 device. They're a fully implantable, chronically implantable device that people choose to get. I know that's a lot simpler than something that goes in your brain, but the concept's the same, which is that people are choosing to get implants into their body. And so I think it's not so far-fetched for me to think about 1 million people having a brain implant. I think we have a sort of different thesis from Elon on what the barriers or bottlenecks to that are. Elon, as he mentions, is a very first principles thinker, and said, the thing that's standing in the way of 1 million implants is he's not very concerned about perception, right? That can change. People didn't like electric cars. They love them now. So I think he doesn't see that as a barrier, and he focused a lot on that kind of surgery. So they're working on their automated surgical robot, etc. I think perception might prove to be more of a challenge than Elon imagines in first stage adoption. And one of the things that I think Motif is focusing on is making devices that feel and seem less scary. So no sewing machine into your brain, just something that replaces a little piece of your skull.
Nick, all the best to you and your team, because yes, I think we humans have forever held apprehensions, but you rightfully pointed out, today we've got pacemakers, there's one point in time, I think, we shunned, cochlear implants or even IVF babies, today it's become a norm, so yes, I think, the perceptions, like you rightfully pointed out, they change over time. Today, I think, currently, all that, the world talks about is artificial intelligence. Now, these large language models, these are statistical models, it's data in, data out. You feed in data and you get the data out, but then there's the other camp, the neuroscientists, they feel that a brain-inspired approach could give rise to what we are talking about, this, general purpose machines or artificial general intelligence. What are your thoughts on that? And who are the right people who are, according to you, are working towards that approach in building machines that are generally aware or intelligent?
Ooh, yeah, that's a fun question. So I think one of the things I found most inspiring about my time at Neuromatch was the group of people I got to meet working on Neuro AI. So I'll probably not do a good job at fully classifying this field because I think there's been some people that have done a better job at defining it. But if we largely think about, or the way that I think about Neuro AI is it's effectively this like study of intelligent systems. And it attempts to leverage both artificial intelligence systems and naturally intelligent systems to understand the core principles of them, such that you can develop or work on affecting both. And so you can think about Neuro AI as sort of neuroscience inspired artificial intelligence or something like that. The definition is slightly different, but you'll have to accept that one from me. I think neuroscience has played a big role in how artificial intelligence has developed. You can even look at the inspiration for things like neural nets as coming from this direction. And then similarly, how we understand artificial intelligence systems has informed how we study the brain. And so there's been a very reciprocal relationship between neuroscience and AI for forever. And I think we're going to see even more of that in the future. You hear a lot of people criticize ChatGPT and OpenAI because it's not true intelligence. It's an autocomplete. It's something that's basically filling in the next word in the sentence, which is, largely true. But we also experience it as intelligent. I think neuroscience can be used to either fine-tune or constrain language models to kind of give them an element of intelligence, or it can be used to inform new neural AI systems. For example, helping to build models or simulations of the brain and how it works would provide a very different type of artificial intelligence in the future. And so I see neuroscience's role as being able to do either or both of these things. One of the questions you asked was, what are some groups or people that are working towards this? I think there's a lot of people secretly working towards this. That is, there's groups that are very public. Patrick Minot is my favorite. He's working with the Amaranth Foundation to start a large company that is effectively trying to gather tons of brain data from lots of areas to build foundation models of the brain that are be fundamental in a new class of artificial intelligence. Excellent approach, a great person to work on it, and like an awesome team of people. But I also think every company that has large data stores also has neuroscience projects in their back pocket. Meta, for example, worked on neural interfacing for a while. It's part of some of the projects they're still doing at Control Labs. There are Google has had neural interface projects in the past, and Apple released a patent or put out a patent a couple of years ago for putting EEG monitoring on AirPods. I think all of these companies are attempting to gather neural data to somehow inform AI models that they're building. And they're using this neural data to potentially constrain these models to perform certain tasks or emulate humans in some type of way. And so I think we're actually seeing a sort of secret race, a race that's happening in the background towards assembling these data stores, getting the right types of neural data to inform the models in the right way. And there's a lot of experiments going on to figure out what the best way to do currently.
Nick, what are the ethical issues of these brain-computer interfaces that keep you up at night?
Yeah. I think the main ethical issue that I think about is actually there's elements of equity that feel a little bit concerning to me. Any new technology is somewhat inherently expensive. And while I expect to see costs of these technologies driven down over time, the release of these things in the beginning are going to be definitely skewed towards wealthier countries and wealthier people in those countries. And to me, that's a sort of concern when we start talking about technologies that make people more efficient, productive, happier, or effective. If you have a neural interface that lets you type 100 times faster because you can directly interface your thoughts to Microsoft Office, or if you have something that can make you more focused or productive, these start to provide advantages to wealthier people that poorer people don't have. And that could accentuate or accelerate a class, sort of a wealth class divide. That's one I think about. I think within certain countries or certain healthcare systems, there are, welfare programs that help with that. So in the US, for example, we have Medicare and Medicaid that help provide insurance, and insurance coverage would make so that many people kind of independent of their wealth background might be able to get access to a device like this. But on a world scale, it starts to look a little bit different. It can be hard for a company to maintain the right level of profitability to be able to drive continued research and development of the technology while reaching to many different areas of the world. And I think this is not unique to neurotechnology. This is true of many medical innovations and all sorts of things. But I think about that one primarily. I know that's sort of maybe a non-satisfying answer because there's a lot of very interesting questions around who owns brain data and how it can and should be used. But to be honest, that's the one that keeps me up the most.
Right. Yeah, I think we getting into such a fantastic as well as scary world. And I think we need more people, companies that are responsible, because for the first time, I think we are going to peer into and outside, inward as well as outside, with through these technologies such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, quantum computing, and so on and so forth. And I think we need to relook at all our institutions, right from our religious institutions to banking institutions to governments, education, because these are so dated and they are so centralized. When the world is so hyper connected, we need, like, what happens at one part of the world affects every part of the world. But yet here we are, we are building these centralized AI, which I don't know what the output of these very possibly eventual general purpose machines would kind of lead the world to, if it's centralized. So I hope that, there are more conversations, and we involve everyone. You rightfully pointed out, when there is access of these kind of tech, when we start using these tech to possibly augmenting people, where does that lead us? And I'm sure that as humans, we are forever creating innovation, because that keeps us going, because there'll always be some mad scientist or some crazy scientist kind of trying to find out who we are, what we are, and peering further. And that's fair enough, because I guess that's what we are here for. We are here to kind of find the answers, deeper answers, to kind of understand who we are. But I think what's happening is that the world is the narrative that the world is kind of created is become a millionaire, become a billionaire, and be in this race towards nowhere, and the output of that is plain to see. We're seeing this, young kids being depressed, stressed out. So I think we've got to change things from the bottom up. We need to relook at religion, which kind of divides us. We need to relook at politics, which kind of divides us. We need to relook at banking, which kind of, banking and borders, which kind of divides us. I think we need to come together, because for the first time we are experiencing a tech stack, or through which we'll be able to understand who we are. Maybe we'll be able to understand what is this human brain, which has so far been a black box, and possibly we'll be able to understand the outside world also, the space better, the world that we kind of live in. We came out of an atom, which is something which I've never been able to kind of wrap my head around, like the Big Bang. It just kind of created everything. I don't think I'll ever be able to kind of wrap around this expanding universe, but it is awesome. It's beautiful. And what needs to be done is maybe people coming together and finding ways that, today we're seeing artificial intelligence, which is creating automations, creating millions of job loss, possibly billions of job loss in the next few years. What would the world mean? We're at the cusp of building these brain-computer interfaces, which may be invasive, maybe non-invasive. We'll be able to structurally and functionally completely understand the human brain. What does that mean for privacy? What does that mean to the fantastic opportunity of making healthcare super awesome? Because I think, there are so many people who have these neurological disorders, which I think with, these brain-computer interfaces, it could be like a ray of hope for them. So my last question to you, we have these terrible, bunch of neurological disorders, right from Down syndromes, ALS, autism, and so on and so forth. Do you think brain-computer interface with AI, biotech will be able to solve this? What's your intuit about that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question, because I think it's sort of central to Motif's thesis. The world is changing faster than evolution sort of allows us to keep up. Our brains really weren't made for the rate of information we're receiving, the exposure to the number of people that we have now, and the tools that we have, such as social media, that are causing widespread depression, are all evidence that we're not really equipped as humans currently to operate well in this world. And the way that I see neurotechnology, I think the way that Motif sees neurotechnology, if I speak for all of us, is that neurotechnology can be a way to help preserve some of our humanity in this rapidly changing digital age. If we can provide a tool that helps us see or realize our best self in some ways, if we can find something that helps us better emotionally regulate or better focus our attention in a world full of distractions or full of emotional triggers, then we can have an experience that is more like being human, as it has been for a long period now, but that keeps up with this rapid change of technology. And so in some ways, we see this technology as a way to preserve humanity and preserve that closeness to what we are and bring back or kind of cast away some of that division or separation by being able to connect us more to the selves that we should and want to be, so that we can operate in this world.
Thank you, Nick, for taking time and being part of the podcast. Wish you and team at Motif Neurotech the very best. And to my listeners, if you like what you see in here, then please press the subscribe button. And until next time, see you guys. Bye-bye. Thank you, Nick. Really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much.